Sex education in America is one of the most talked about yet least understood topics in the world of wellness and psychology. Despite living in a country that leads the globe in science, technology, and culture, millions of Americans still grow up believing myths about sexual health that were never true in the first place. Why? Because the U.S. doesn't have one unified national sex education program. Instead, each state decides what to teach, and that patchwork system creates huge gaps in knowledge. In fact, some states provide comprehensive lessons on anatomy, consent, and contraception, while others still rely heavily on abstinence-only approaches, leaving young people confused, misinformed, or completely unprepared for real-life relationships. And here's the shocking part: those gaps don't just affect teenagers, they shape how adults in America think about intimacy, safety, and wellness for the rest of their lives. The result? A society filled with myths. Ask the average American about sex education, and you'll still hear outdated claims like talking about sex makes teens have more sex, or condoms don't really work, or even boys and girls need totally different lessons. These myths sound simple, but their consequences are massive. Higher rates of teen pregnancy, rising cases of STIs, and a generation of adults carrying shame instead of knowledge. And what makes it even worse is that many parents and schools, out of fear or discomfort, stay silent, leaving kids to learn from unreliable sources like peers or even pornography. This silence creates what psychologists call a knowledge vacuum. And whenever there's a vacuum, misinformation rushes in to fill the gap. That's why this video is so important. Today, we're going to expose the 7 most common myths about sex education in America that millions of people still believe. And we're not just going to debunk them with opinions, we'll back everything with psychology, medical research, and real statistics that prove why these myths are not only wrong, but harmful. By understanding the truth, you'll see why better education isn't just about preventing pregnancy. It's about empowering people to build healthier relationships, stronger communication, and greater self-confidence in every stage of life. But here's where you need to pay attention. The myths you'll hear about in this video aren't just affecting classrooms, they're affecting marriages, dating culture, and even mental health across the United States. If you've ever wondered why Americans have such mixed messages about sex, why some communities treat it as taboo, or why misinformation spreads so easily, the answer lies in these myths. Busting them is the first step toward creating a healthier, more open society. So stay tuned, because over the next few minutes we'll uncover truths that could change the way you think about sex education forever. From abstinence-only myths to misconceptions about contraception and gender roles, nothing is off-limits. And by the end, you'll not only understand what went wrong with America's approach, you'll also know how to spot false information and protect yourself with knowledge that truly empowers. Myth 1 and 2, talking about sex encourages teen sex, abstinence only works. The first myth we need to confront is one of the most persistent in American culture. If you talk to teens about sex, it will make them want to do it soon. This belief is repeated by parents, politicians, and even some school boards, but research shows the exact opposite. According to multiple studies published in the Journal of Adolescent Health and the CDC's national surveys, comprehensive sex education programs actually delay the age of first sexual activity. That's right, when teenagers are taught accurate information about their bodies, contraception, and consent, they don't rush into sex. They make more thoughtful choices, wait longer, and practice safer behaviors when they do decide. Silence, on the other hand, doesn't protect them. It leaves them vulnerable to half-truths and peer pressure. In fact, psychologists call this the forbidden fruit effect. When a subject is made taboo, curiosity rises, but without guidance, teens explore in unsafe ways. So the idea that education encourages sex is not just false, it's dangerous. Now let's tackle the second myth. Abstinence-only education works. For decades, billions of dollars in U.S. federal funding have gone into abstinence-only programs, especially in conservative states. These programs tell teens that the only way to stay safe is to avoid sex until marriage. While abstinence is of course one valid choice, studies consistently show that abstinence-only education fails to prepare teens for real life. Research from the American Public Health Association reveals that states with abstinence-only policies actually report higher rates of teen pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections compared to states with comprehensive sex education. Because abstinence only leaves out crucial information about contraception, condoms, and consent, when teenagers eventually do become sexually active, as the vast majority do, they lack the tools to protect themselves. It's like sending someone to drive on the highway without ever teaching them how to use brakes or signals. The consequences are not small. In America, the teen birth rate is significantly higher than in most developed countries, and public health experts trace a large part of this problem back to inconsistent and outdated sex education policies. More troubling is the psychological toll. Abstinence-only education often frames sex in terms of shame, guilt, or ruining your future. This messaging doesn't just discourage risky behavior, it discourages healthy conversations about intimacy, relationships, and emotional well-being. As a result, many young adults enter college or marriage carrying stigma and confusion about their own sexuality, which leads to anxiety, poor communication, and in many cases, unhealthy relationships. It's important to understand, no credible scientific study has ever shown abstinence-only education to be more effective than comprehensive approaches. The evidence is overwhelming. Teens who receive comprehensive sex education are more likely to use protection, less likely to contract STIs, and more likely to delay intercourse until they feel ready. That's not opinion, that's decades of psychology and public health research. So the next time you hear someone say, talking about sex encourages teens to do it, or abstinence only is the safest path, remember the facts. Education doesn't spark recklessness, it builds responsibility. Silence doesn't protect kids, it leaves them defenseless. And if America wants healthier outcomes, it must face these truths and embrace a model of education that empowers, not restricts. Myth 3 and 4. Contraception encourages promiscuity. Condoms are not effective. One of the most harmful misconceptions in American sex education is the belief that teaching teens about contraceptions somehow encourages them to be promiscuous. This myth has been echoed for decades, particularly in conservative communities, but once again, the evidence tells a different story. According to the Guttmacher Institute and the American Academy of Pediatrics, teens who learn about birth control in school are actually more likely to delay sexual activity compared to those who receive abstinence-only education. And when they do become sexually active, they are far more likely to use protection consistently. The truth is simple: knowledge does not cause recklessness, it creates responsibility. When young people understand how contraception works, they are less anxious, more prepared, and better able to make thoughtful choices about intimacy. Ignoring the topic doesn't stop curiosity, it just leaves teens unprepared when the moment eventually arrives. Closely linked to this myth is another one that continues to cause real harm. Condoms are not effective. In some U.S. classrooms, educators downplay condoms by emphasizing failure rates, suggesting they don't really work. This creates unnecessary fear and stigma, leading many teens to dismiss condoms altogether. The reality, when used correctly and consistently, condoms are 98% effective at preventing pregnancy and highly effective at reducing the risk of HIV and other sexually transmitted infections. Even with typical use, where human error lowers the success rate, condoms still provide significant protection. In fact, the CDC considers condoms one of the most essential public health tools in reducing the spread of disease. So why do these myths persist? Part of the problem lies in cultural discomfort around openly discussing sex. In some U.S. communities, educators fear that teaching about condoms or contraception might send the message that adults are encouraging sexual behavior. But withholding information has the opposite effect. It denies young people the chance to make safe, informed decisions. Instead of learning about effectiveness, proper usage, and accessibility, many teens are left to experiment without guidance, increasing their risk of unintended pregnancies and STIs. In this way, the myth doesn't just misinform, it directly harms public health. There's also a psychological impact. When young people are told that condoms don't really work, they may internalize a sense of hopelessness, believing that no method can protect them. This mindset can lead to risky behavior, avoidance of safer practices, and unnecessary anxiety in relationships. By contrast, when teens are taught the real numbers, success rates, how to use protection correctly, and why dual methods, like condoms plus another form of birth control, are even more effective, they feel empowered rather than fearful. Knowledge doesn't invite danger, it creates confidence and responsibility. In short, contraception education is not about promoting promiscuity, it's about promoting safety. And condoms are not unreliable, they are one of the most effective tools we have. The real danger isn't giving teens this information, it's keeping it from them. America's future health depends on replacing fear-driven myths with science-backed truth. And in the next section, we'll break down another widespread misunderstanding, the idea that boys and girls need completely different sex education. Myth 5. Boys need different sex ed than girls. Another common misconception in American classrooms is that boys and girls need completely different sex education. At first glance, this might sound logical. After all, male and female bodies have different reproductive systems. But the deeper truth is that separating education by gender creates more harm than good. Comprehensive sex education is not just about anatomy, it's about understanding relationships, consent, emotions, and responsibility. These are universal lessons, and when one group is left out of information, the result is misunderstanding, stigma, and inequality. In fact, research from the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, SES, shows that when both boys and girls receive the same information in the same classroom, communication improves, myths break down, and respect between genders grows. The problem with dividing lessons by gender is that it reinforces stereotypes. For example, boys are often told to focus on protection and control, while girls are told to focus on abstinence and avoiding pregnancy. This creates a false narrative that boys are naturally more sexual and that girls are responsible for setting boundaries. Not only is this outdated, it's dangerous. It feeds into the cultural double standards that blame young women for unintended pregnancies while excusing young men from responsibility. True education must address both sides equally, showing that safe intimacy and respect are shared responsibilities, not gendered ones. Another issue is the exclusion of LGBTQ students. In many American schools, sex education is still taught from a strictly heterosexual perspective. By dividing education by boys and girls, the system fails to acknowledge students who don't fit neatly into those categories. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and non-binary youth are left out of vital conversations about safe practices, consent, and mental health. Studies show that LGBTQ teens in the U.S. are more likely to face higher risks of STIs and emotional struggles precisely because their needs are ignored in traditional sex education. A gender-divided system doesn't prepare them for real-world relationships, it isolates them. And let's not forget the psychological effect. When boys and girls are separated, both groups lose valuable perspectives. Boys don't learn how menstruation works, which can foster ignorance or insensitivity. Girls don't learn about erections or male fertility in depth, which can create unnecessary fear or confusion. Later in life, this lack of shared knowledge makes open communication between partners much harder. By contrast, when both groups learn together, they develop empathy and respect for each other's experience. Instead of treating sex as a mystery or taboo, it becomes a shared subject of understanding. The truth is simple: sex education should not be divided by gender. It should be inclusive, comprehensive, and teaching boys and girls separately may seem protective, but it actually keeps them in the dark. What young people need are the tools to communicate honestly, respect boundaries, and share responsibility for healthy intimacy. Skills that apply to everyone, regardless of gender or orientation. In our next section, we'll take on another dangerous myth shaping the minds of American youth: the belief that pornography can act as a substitute for real sex education. Myth 6. Porn is an acceptable substitute for sex education. In the absence of comprehensive classroom lessons, many teens turn to the internet for answers, and what they often find is adult content that was never designed to educate. Surveys show that in the U.S., a majority of teenagers report seeing porn before the age of 18, and for many it becomes their first exposure to intimacy. The problem is obvious: pornography is entertainment, not education. It exaggerates performance, ignores emotional connection, and leaves out essential realities like consent, contraception, and communication. Yet, because formal education is missing, countless young Americans mistake these fantasies for fact. The risks go far beyond misinformation. Psychologists warn that heavy reliance on porn as an educational tool can distort expectations and fuel anxiety. For boys, it often creates pressure to perform in unrealistic ways: longer, stronger, always confident, standards that no real human relationship can meet. For girls, it can foster body image insecurities and the harmful belief that intimacy is about pleasing a partner rather than mutual respect. Even more concerning, porn almost never depicts conversations about protection, consent, or emotional well-being, which are cornerstones of healthy intimacy. In this way, porn doesn't just fail as education, it actively teaches the wrong lessons. Another problem is accessibility. With smartphones and laptops, adult content is only a click away. Without proper guidance from parents or educators, teens explore in isolation, interpreting what they see without context. This secrecy adds shame to curiosity, reinforcing the idea that sex is something hidden, forbidden, or over time, repeated exposure wires the brain to expect fantasy scenarios in real relationships, which can lead to disappointment, anxiety, and in some cases, difficulties with arousal. The irony is that young people seek porn to understand intimacy, but end up feeling even more confused and insecure. The solution is not to pretend pornography doesn't exist, it's to equip teens with the tools to interpret it critically. This is called media literacy in psychology and education. Just as students are taught to question news sources or advertising, they should also learn to recognize the difference between entertainment and reality in sexual content. Comprehensive sex education that includes conversations about porn doesn't normalize it, it neutralizes. By framing adult content as fiction, not instruction, educators help teens separate curiosity from confusion. Parents also play a role. Open conversations at home can prevent the secrecy and shame that push teens deeper into misinformation. When young people know they can ask honest questions without judgment, they are less likely to turn to the internet for answers. Research shows that teens who discuss intimacy with parents and educators are less influenced by porn and more prepared for real-world relations. So let's be clear. Pornography is not sex education. It may exist as entertainment, but it cannot replace the role of parents, teachers, and trusted resources in teaching safe, respectful, and healthy intimacy. In the next and final section, we'll take on one last myth, that sex education ends after high school, and explore why lifelong learning is the true key to sexual wellness. Myth 7 in conclusion, sex ed ends after high school, holistic path. The final myth we need to tackle is one of the most overlooked, sex education ends after high school. Many Americans assume that once a student graduates, the conversation about sexual health is over. But in reality, intimacy and wellness are lifelong subjects that evolve at every stage of life. Think about it. Teens may need guidance about consent and contraception, but young adults face new challenges like managing relationships in college, dealing with stress, and balancing independence with responsibility. Married couples may need education about family planning, communication, or rekindling intimacy. Older adults may need information about hormonal changes, menopause, erectile health, or navigating new relationships later in life. Yet America's system rarely provides ongoing resources, leaving millions of people unprepared. The truth is clear, sex education is not a one-time class, it's a lifelong learning process. This myth is especially damaging because it creates a false sense of closure. People assume that if they didn't learn something in high school, it's too late to ask now. But knowledge about sexual wellness is like knowledge about nutrition, exercise, or mental health. It must grow with you. For example, research from the American Psychological Association shows that couples who continue learning and talking about intimacy report stronger relationships and higher satisfaction than those who rely only on what they learned as teenagers. In other words, sexual wellness education should continue into adulthood, not stop at graduation. The absence of lifelong learning is part of why so many American adults still believe outdated myths. Without updated information, people cling to what they heard in school, or worse, from unreliable sources. This leads to persistent misunderstandings about contraception, STIs, consent, and even emotional intimacy. By contrast, countries with stronger continuous sex education programs report healthier outcomes at every stage, lower rates of teen pregnancy, fewer STIs, better communication between partners, and greater overall relationship satisfaction. America's challenge is not just fixing high school curriculums, it's building a culture where learning about intimacy never stops. So what's the path forward? It starts with reframing sexual wellness as part of overall health, not as a taboo subject hidden in adolescence. Just as people regularly see doctors for checkups, exercise for fitness, and learn new skills for work, they should also have access to credible resources for sexual health throughout life. Workshops, online education, therapy, and open conversations can all play a role. Parents, educators, and even media creators share the responsibility of breaking silence and replacing myths with facts. The big takeaway is this: sex education is not just about preventing problems, it's about creating healthier, happier, comprehensive, continuous education builds confidence, respect, and connection. It prepares people not just for safer intimacy, but for stronger relationships and better mental health. By rejecting myths and embracing lifelong learning, America can move toward a future where sexual wellness is no longer controversial, but celebrated as an essential part of human growth. So the next time someone says sex ed is just for teenagers, remember, your body, your relationships, and your needs evolve across a lifetime. Education should evolve with you. That's the real truth, and embracing it is the key to breaking free from myths and building a healthier America for generations to come.